The planning room looked strange compared to the high-tech alien command centers nearby. Instead of holographic displays and quantum computers, Jae-woo and his team sat around an old metal table covered with hand-drawn maps notes written on actual, paper and physical models made from spare parts. The alien military advisors found this primitive approach confusing, but the humans seemed to work better when they could touch and move pieces around with their hands. Bo-Ram had spent the past week doing what she did best, breaking into computer systems that were supposed to be impossible to crack. She had discovered something interesting about the Vorthan Empire's security networks. All their systems were incredibly advanced, but they followed the same logical patterns that had been programmed into them thousands of years ago. The problem with perfect security, Bo-Ram explained while drawing diagrams on paper, is that it becomes predictable. Every protocol is designed to stop attacks. That makes sense. The fortress expects enemies to come with fleets of warships, advanced stealth technology, or massive ground assaults. But what if we do something completely stupid instead? She had found detailed records of every ship that had approached Kronex 7 over the past century. Military vessels were detected and destroyed while they were still millions of miles away. Smuggler ships were caught by sensor sweeps that could identify hidden compartments. Even diplomatic vessels were searched thoroughly before being allowed to approach. But there was one type of ship that barely registered on the fortress security systems. Garbage transports came every few weeks to remove waste from the prison facilities. These boring, routine vessels were so uninteresting that the automated defenses gave them only basic scans. The guards assumed that nobody would be crazy enough to hide inside alien sewage and biological waste. Dong Hyun studied the shipping manifests and found patterns that official military intelligence had missed. The garbage ships followed predictable routes and schedules. They used old slow engines that could not maneuver quickly. They carried identification beacons that marked them as harmless civilian vessels. "Know the captain of one of those waste haulers," Dong Hyun said, grinning as he pointed to shipping records. "Guy named Captain Zerk owes me money from a card game. He'll let us hide in his cargo hold if we pay him enough and promise not to get him killed." The plan was starting to form, but they needed to understand the prison layout better. Hyejin had been studying the fortress blueprints with the eye of someone who understood how buildings could be destroyed. She noticed something that 10,000 years of military engineers had overlooked. The prison had been designed to keep people inside, not to keep explosions from spreading outward. All the strongest defenses faced space to prevent rescue attempts from outside, but the internal structure was vulnerable to chain reactions that could bring down entire sections if someone knew exactly where to place charges. "Look at these support beams," Hyejin said, tracing lines on the architectural drawings. "The whole place is like a house of cards. If you remove the right pieces at the right time, the whole thing starts falling down." The builders were so focused on making it impossible to break in that they forgot about making it stable. She had identified 12 critical structural points where small explosions could cause maximum damage. Each charge would need to be precisely placed and timed to create a cascade failure that would shut down power to the detention blocks while opening escape routes through the rubble. Woo Jin had been studying something different: the medical records and prisoner population reports. He discovered that Ye Jin was being held in the hospital wing because she had developed severe allergic reactions to the alien atmosphere. This information gave them both a target location and a potential advantage. The medical staff are the only guards trained to keep prisoners alive instead of just killing intruders, Woo Jin explained. "If we can reach the hospital wing, we might find people willing to help us, especially if we can prove we're there to save someone's life, not to cause trouble." He had also noticed patterns in the guard schedules that revealed when the minimum number of personnel would be on duty. There was a 15-minute window every few days when most of the security forces were off duty because it coincided with a shift change and a meal break. The plan they developed made no logical sense to any military computer. It involved getting captured on purpose, starting a prison riot, causing multiple system failures, and escaping during the chaos. When the alien advisors heard this strategy, they ran new calculations and determined that the survival probability had dropped to almost zero. General Caxtor tried to explain that prison riots were contained by killing everyone involved. Commander Vex 9 pointed out that causing system failures would trap them inside the fortress with no way out. Admiral Zorketh noted that the guards would simply shoot all the escapees, rather than try to sort out who was supposed to be there. But Jae-woo had learned something during his years of completing impossible missions. Sometimes the best strategy was to create so much confusion that the enemy could not tell what was really happening. If the prison guards were dealing with multiple emergencies at the same time, they might not notice 5 additional people moving through the chaos. The fortress has never dealt with a coordinated attack from inside, Jae-woo said, studying the guard response protocols. All their procedures assume that trouble will come from space, not from prisoners who are supposed to be helpless. Every security system is designed to prevent people from getting in, not to stop people who are already inside from moving around. BORAM would create computer glitches that would unlock doors and disable surveillance cameras at crucial moments. Her virus programs were designed to spread slowly through the system, causing small problems that would gradually build into major failures. Dong-hyun would use his knowledge of criminal behavior to turn the prisoner population into allies. Many of the inmates were smugglers, pirates, and rebels who had been captured while fighting against the Vorthon Empire. They would be eager to cause trouble if given the opportunity. Hae-jin would place her explosives to create maximum disruption with minimum casualties. Her charges would knock out power systems and communications while opening new passages through the fortress walls. The goal was to create chaos, not to murder everyone in sight. Woo-jin would locate Ye-jin in the medical wing and prepare her for evacuation while treating any injuries the team might suffer during the mission. His medical knowledge would also help them understand the layout of the hospital section, where their target was being held. The timing had to be perfect. Everything would happen during the 15-minute window, when the guard shift was changing BORAM's computer. Virus would activate at exactly the same moment that Hae-jin's explosives went off. Dong-hyun would open the cell doors while Woo-jin reached the medical wing. All 5 team members would converge on the escape route before the fortress could organize a proper response. The alien commanders ran thousands of simulations trying to find any scenario where the plan might work. Every computer model showed the same result: complete failure followed by the death of everyone involved. But the humans seemed confident that their computers could not calculate the most important variable. Your machines can predict what rational people will do, Jae-woo told the alien advisors, but this mission depends on irrational humans doing impossible things because they refuse to accept that they're supposed to fail. Dr. So-min Park listened to the plan and felt both hope and terror. She knew her friend was brilliant at solving impossible problems, but this scheme seemed more like suicide than strategy. When she asked if he really thought it would work, Jae-woo smiled and said something that would be quoted in military academies for generations. "The plan doesn't have to be perfect," he said. "It just has to be so crazy that the enemy never sees it coming." On the final day before departure, the team gathered their equipment and prepared for a journey that every computer in the galaxy had calculated as impossible. The aliens watched these preparations with fascination and horror, wondering if they were witnessing human genius or human madness. But the 5 humans seemed calm and confident as they boarded the garbage transport ship that would carry them to the most dangerous prison in the galaxy. They had a plan that made no sense to anyone except themselves, and that was exactly what made it perfect. The meeting room on the big space station was full of aliens from different planets and one human who looked very small next to all of them. Commander Jae-woo Kim stood at the back wearing his blue Earth Navy uniform, while creatures with 6 arms and purple skin talked in voices that sounded like metal scraping against rocks. The hologram in the center of the room showed a planet that looked like a giant metal ball floating in space with red lightning storms dancing around it. This was Kronex 7, the most dangerous prison in the entire galaxy, where the worst criminals and enemies were kept locked away forever. Dr. So-min Park was crying as she stood next to the hologram. Her daughter Ye-jin had been captured 3 weeks ago during a peace mission to the Outer Rim worlds. The enemy soldiers said she was a spy, even though everyone knew she was just a doctor trying to help sick children. The alien court had sentenced her to life in prison on the metal death planet. General Caxtor was a tall creature with 4 eyes and skin like tree bark. He had been fighting wars for 200 years and had never seen a place as scary as Kronex 7. The prison planet had energy shields that could destroy entire fleets of warships before they got close, automated guns that could shoot a single person from 1,000,000 miles away. Underground tunnels protected by force fields that no weapon could break through. The computers had been working for 3 days straight, calculating every possible way to rescue Ye Jin from the prison planet. Every simulation ended the same way: complete failure. Total death of anyone who tried. The alien generals showed charts and graphs that proved no rescue mission could possibly work. Commander Vex 9 was a robot who had fought in 1,000 battles. His metal voice made clicking sounds as he explained the defense systems. Around the planet were floating mines that would explode if anything came too close. The surface had laser towers that moved so fast they could track a butterfly. The prison itself was built inside a mountain of solid metal with walls 10 feet thick. Admiral Zorketh had tentacles instead of arms, and his voice bubbled like water. She had studied the prison plans for 50 years and knew every corridor, every guard post, every weapon. The prisoners were kept in cells that were buried so deep underground that no signal could reach them. The only way in or out was through a single transport tube that was watched by 100 different security systems. The alien leaders took turns explaining why the mission was impossible. The radiation storms around the planet would kill anyone in minutes. The guards were all cyborgs with weapons built into their bodies. The computer systems could not be hacked because they were not connected to any outside networks. The whole place was designed to keep people in forever, and it had worked perfectly for 10,000 years. When all the aliens finished talking, they turned to look at the human. Everyone expected Commander Jae-woo Kim to agree that nothing could be done. They thought he would accept that his friend's daughter was lost forever, just like any reasonable military officer would do. But Jae-woo did something that made all the aliens stare at him with confusion. He smiled like someone had just told him a funny joke. He pulled out a small computer tablet and started looking at the prison blueprints. His fingers moved across the screen as he studied guard, schedules, and weapon placements. After a long moment of silence, Jae-woo looked up at all the alien commanders. His dark eyes had a strange light in them that made some of the creatures step backward. He spoke in a calm voice that carried across the entire meeting room. "So what am I supposed to do with the other 98%, he said. The aliens looked at each other, wondering if their translation devices were broken. General Caxtor asked what the human meant by 98%. Commander Vex 9 ran a diagnostic on his language processors. Admiral Zorketh's tentacles twisted in confusion. Dr. Somin Park was the first to understand. She had worked with human soldiers before and knew how their minds worked. When other species heard about a 2% chance of success, they focused on the 98% chance of failure. But humans were different. When they heard 2%, they heard possibility. They heard hope. They heard a challenge. Jae-woo was already downloading the prison files onto his personal computer. He studied the guard rotation schedules, the supply delivery routes, the energy consumption patterns. His mind was working like a machine, looking for weaknesses that no alien military academy had ever taught anyone to find. The room became very quiet, as all the alien commanders realized that the human was not going to give up. They had seen this before in other humans, but it still surprised them. Every other species in the galaxy understood when something was impossible. Humans seemed to think impossible was just another word for difficult. General Caxtor tried to explain again that the mission would result in certain death for everyone involved. He showed more charts that proved no ship could get close to the planet without being destroyed. He displayed weapon specifications that demonstrated how the prison defenses could kill thousands of attackers. But Jae-woo just nodded and kept studying the files. He asked questions that no one else had thought of. How often did supply ships visit the prison? What kind of waste disposal systems did they use? Were there any blind spots in the sensor coverage? What happened during the radiation storms that happened every few days? Commander Vex 9 accessed his combat databases and tried to show the humans similar missions that had failed. He displayed the wreckage of 12 different rescue attempts over the past century. Each one had been planned by the best military minds in the galaxy. Each one had ended in disaster. Admiral Zorketh explained that even if someone could somehow reach the planet's surface, they would still have to get through the mountain fortress, find one specific prisoner among thousands, and escape while being hunted by an entire army. She said it was like trying to steal a single grain of sand from the bottom of the ocean. But Jae-woo kept asking his strange questions. How many guards worked each shift? What did they eat for meals? Where did they sleep? What kind of entertainment did they have? Were there any holidays or special events? What happened when someone got sick? The aliens began to realize that the human was not thinking about this mission the same way they were. They focused on all the weapons and defenses and security systems, but he was asking about people and routines and small details that seemed unimportant. Dr. So-min Park watched her friend work and felt something she had not felt in weeks. Hope. She knew that Jae-woo had completed impossible missions before he had rescued hostages from planets that were at war. He had infiltrated enemy bases that were supposed to be impossible to enter. He had a reputation for succeeding when everyone said he would fail as the meeting ended. The alien commanders were still trying to convince the human to abandon the mission. They brought up more statistics and showed more proof that rescue was impossible. But Jae-woo just smiled and said he needed 3 days to put together his team. After all the aliens left the meeting room, Dr. So-min Park sat down next to her friend. She asked if he really thought he could save her daughter from the most secure prison in the galaxy. Jae-woo looked at the hologram of the metal death planet and said something that would become famous throughout human space. The aliens calculated a 2% chance of success. He said, that means 98% of this mission is going to be easy. The next morning, Commander Jae-woo Kim walked through the corridors of the space station, while alien officers watched him with curiosity and fear. Everyone knew he had accepted the impossible mission to rescue Dr. So-min Park's daughter from Kronex 7, but nobody understood why he was not gathering elite soldiers or advanced weapons. Instead, he was heading toward the detention center where prisoners were kept. The first person he wanted to recruit was sitting in a small cell playing cards with himself. Dong-hyun Lee had been caught 3 months ago selling illegal weapons to both sides of a war between 2 alien species. He was supposed to be transferred to a prison colony, but the paperwork was moving slowly through the bureaucracy. Dong-hyun was a thin man with quick eyes and hands that never stopped moving. He had grown up on the streets of Seoul before joining the merchant marine and learning to pilot ships through dangerous space routes. When legal cargo became too boring, he started smuggling valuable items across military blockades until he got too greedy and was captured. When Jae-woo entered the detention cell, Dong-hyun looked up from his cards and grinned. He had heard about the crazy rescue mission everyone was talking about. The guards thought no human would be stupid enough to try it, but Dong-hyun knew better. He had worked with military types before and recognized the look in the commander's eyes. You want someone who knows how to get into places where they don't belong, Dong-hyun said before Jae-woo could speak. Lucky for you, I'm the best smuggler in this part of the galaxy. I've broken into systems that governments claim are impossible to crack. Jae-woo explained that the mission would probably end in death for everyone involved. The prison planet was surrounded by defenses that had never been defeated in 10,000 years. But Dong-hyun just laughed and said he had been bored sitting in detention for months, waiting for something interesting to happen. The choice was simple: 20 years in a prison colony or one mission with a small chance of survival. Dong-hyun stood up and shook hands with the commander, saying he had always wanted to see if the famous Kronex 7 was really as impossible to break into as everyone claimed. The second recruit was causing trouble in the military barracks on level 7. Hee-jin Choi had been discharged from the Earth Marines for using too much explosive on every mission she was assigned. She had a talent for demolitions but no sense of proportion. When told to blow a hole in a wall, she would destroy the entire building. Hee-jin was short and muscular with burn scars on her hands from working with dangerous chemicals. She came from Busan, where her father had been a construction worker who taught her about explosives before she joined the military. Her commanding officers said she was brilliant at her job, but impossible to control. When Jae-woo found her, she was in the gymnasium lifting weights that were designed for aliens twice her size. She had been waiting for transportation back to Earth but was not looking forward to facing a court-martial for her latest incident involving a warehouse that was supposed to be searched, not vaporized. They say you need someone who can blow things up, Hee-jin said, wiping sweat from her face. I'm guessing this isn't going to be a quiet, sneaky mission where we tiptoe around trying not to wake anybody up. Jae-woo explained that the prison planet had defenses that were built to withstand massive attacks but might have weaknesses that could be exploited with precise demolitions. Hyejin smiled and said that precision was overrated. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to make it disappear. In a big explosion, the alien military advisors who were following Jae-woo tried to point out that stealth would be essential for infiltrating Kronex 7. But the commander just said that sometimes the best way to be quiet was to make so much noise that enemies couldn't hear you coming from another direction. The third team member was found in the computer center where she was supposed to be working on routine data processing, but was actually trying to hack into classified military files. Bo Ram-song was 19 years old and had been arrested for breaking into alien government databases, just to prove she could do it. Bo Ram had grown up in a poor family in Daegu, where she learned to use computers by fixing broken ones that rich people threw away. She discovered she had a talent for understanding how different systems worked and could find ways into networks that were supposed to be secure. Her parents thought she was just playing games until the police showed up at their door. She was facing deportation to a prison colony for trying to hack the Galactic Banking Consortium. But the legal process was taking forever, because her lawyer was arguing that curiosity should not be a crime. When Jae-woo found her, she was bored and had already started working on cracking the security codes for Kronex 7 just for fun. "The prison computer system is really interesting," Boram said without looking up from her screen. "It's got 17 different layers of security, but they all follow the same logical patterns. If you understand how Vorthon programmers think, you can probably find a way around most of their defenses." Jae-woo asked if she thought breaking into the most secure computer network in the galaxy would be challenging enough to keep her interested. Boram grinned and said it sounded much more fun than spending 20 years breaking rocks on a prison planet. The final recruit was the hardest to convince because he was not in trouble with the law. Woo Jin Nam was a medic who had been kicked out of every military unit he had served with, not because he was bad at his job, but because he refused to follow orders when those orders meant letting people die. Woo Jin was older than the others, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He came from a family of doctors in Gwangju and had joined the military to help people, but kept getting in trouble for treating enemy wounded or refusing to abandon civilians in war zones. When Jae-woo found him, he was working in the station medical center treating injured refugees from various conflicts. Woo Jin listened to the mission briefing and immediately said he wanted to help rescue Ye-jin, but pointed out that the other team members would probably need medical attention during the mission. The alien commanders who were monitoring the recruitment process became more worried with each new team member. They tried to explain that Jae-woo was assembling a group of criminals, misfits and rule breakers who would probably get each other killed before they even reached the prison planet. But the commander just nodded and said that was exactly what he was looking for. Normal soldiers followed normal procedures, and normal procedures were why everyone said this mission was impossible. He needed people who would think differently and take risks that no military manual would ever recommend. Dr. Somin Park watched her friend put together this strange team and wondered if he had lost his mind. The smuggler, the explosives expert, the hacker, and the medic did not look like the elite commandos she expected for such a dangerous mission. But Jae-woo seemed confident that these 4 people were exactly what he needed on. The last day before departure, the team gathered in a secure briefing room to go over the mission parameters. The alien advisors presented final calculations, showing that adding more unpredictable humans to the mission had actually made the survival probability worse. Jae-woo looked at his team of misfits and smiled. He told them that every computer in the galaxy had calculated their chances of success and determined that they were all going to die. But computers could not calculate human stubbornness or the determination of people who had nothing left to lose. Dong-hyun checked his smuggling equipment and said he had always wanted to steal something that was supposed to be impossible to steal. Ye-jin examined her explosives and commented that she had never blown up anything as big as a prison planet. Boram loaded her hacking programs and said the Vorthon computer systems were about to learn what human creativity could do. Woo Jin packed his medical supplies and promised that everyone would come home alive as the team prepared for departure. The alien observers calculated one final probability assessment. The odds of success for 5 humans with nothing to lose, led by someone who specialized in impossible missions facing enemies, who had never encountered human refusal to accept defeat, could not be calculated because their computers had no formula for measuring hope against despair. The garbage transport ship moved slowly through space carrying its usual cargo of biological waste recycling materials, and 5 humans, hidden in specially designed containers that Dong Hyun had acquired from his smuggling contacts. The ship looked exactly like it had during hundreds of previous visits to Kronex 7, boring, routine, and completely harmless. Captain Zirk was a nervous alien who reminded Jae-woo of a large blue frog. He kept checking his instruments and muttering about how stupid this plan was and how they were all going to die. But he owed Dong Hyun money from several card games and needed the payment they had promised him more than he needed to stay safe. The fortress sensors performed their standard scan as the garbage ship approached. They detected nothing unusual about a cargo hold full of waste materials and cleaning supplies. The automated systems marked the vessel as approved for docking and assigned it to Loading Bay 7, where the regular maintenance crews were waiting. Inside their hidden compartments, the 5 humans could feel the ship shaking as it entered the atmosphere of Kronex 7. The radiation storms that surrounded the planet made the journey bumpy, but their containers were shielded against the deadly energy that would have killed them in seconds if they had been exposed. When the ship finally docked, Jae-woo felt the familiar calm that came over him before every dangerous mission. His heart rate slowed down. His breathing became steady and his mind focused completely on the task ahead. He had trained for situations like this his entire military career, and now all that preparation was about to be tested. The loading crews that came aboard to unload the garbage were bored, aliens who had done this same job thousands of times. They used mechanical lifts to move the containers without bothering to examine them closely. None of them noticed that 5 of the waste bins were slightly heavier than usual, or that they contained breathing apparatus and life support systems. Bo-ram was the first to emerge from her hiding place once the containers were stored in a processing facility. She connected her portable computer to a maintenance terminal and began introducing small glitches into the prison security network. Nothing obvious enough to trigger alarms, but enough to create brief gaps in surveillance coverage. Her virus programs spread through the system like a digital disease. Every few minutes, another camera would malfunction or a door lock would reset itself. The fortress technicians assumed they were dealing with routine equipment failures and followed standard procedures for fixing minor problems. Dong Hyun made his way through service corridors using maps he had memorized during the planning phase. His years of smuggling had taught him to move quietly and avoid security patrols. He reached the main prisoner housing blocks and began studying the guard routines, looking for patterns that matched what they had learned from stolen schedules. The fortress was larger than any building he had ever seen, with corridors that stretched for miles and levels that went deep underground. Thousands of prisoners were kept in cells that were designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy. But most of the inmates were political prisoners, rebels, and people who had opposed the Vorthon Empire. Hai Jin followed maintenance tunnels toward the power distribution centers carrying a backpack full of small explosive devices. Each charge was precisely calibrated to cause specific types of damage without killing innocent people. She had spent weeks calculating exactly how much force would be needed to disrupt the fortress systems. The prison power grid was more complex than anything she had worked with before, but the basic principles were the same. Overload, the right circuits at the right time, and the whole system would cascade into failure. She began placing charges at structural weak points that would amplify the explosive force and spread the damage throughout the facility. Woo Jin headed directly toward the medical wing using false identification that Bo-ram had created for him. The hospital section was in a different part of the fortress, connected by transport tubes that carried patients and medical supplies. He posed as a maintenance worker, responding to computer problems that were actually being caused by Bo-ram's hacking. The medical wing was cleaner and quieter than the rest of the prison, with white walls and the smell of antiseptic chemicals. The guards here were different too, more interested in keeping patients alive than in shooting intruders. Woo Jin found Ye Jin in a hospital room where she was being treated for severe allergic reactions to the alien atmosphere. Ye Jin was weak and sick, but her mind was still sharp enough to recognize that rescue had finally arrived. She had been imprisoned for 3 weeks and had begun to think her mother would never find a way to get her out. When Wu Jin explained that her rescue team was already inside the fortress, she started crying with relief, and Hope Jae-woo took the most dangerous assignment, infiltrating the central command center, where the fortress security systems were controlled. He had studied the guard schedules and identified the exact moment when the minimum number of personnel would be on duty. But reaching the command center required passing through multiple checkpoints and security barriers. The fortress corridors were filled with armed guards who had been trained to kill anyone who didn't belong. Security cameras tracked every movement, and automated weapons could target intruders from hidden positions. But Jae-woo moved through this dangerous environment like a ghost, using skills he had learned during years of impossible missions. When he finally reached the command center, he found exactly what he had expected: a dozen technicians monitoring screens that showed every part of the prison complex. The guards were confident that their fortress was impregnable and had no idea that 5 humans were already moving through their most secure areas. The moment for action arrived exactly as they had planned. Bo-Ram triggered her computer virus, causing multiple system failures throughout the fortress. Surveillance cameras went offline, door locks malfunctioned, and communication systems began broadcasting conflicting emergency alerts. Jin detonated her explosives in a carefully timed sequence that knocked out power to the detention blocks without bringing down the entire structure. The fortress shook as if hit by an earthquake, and emergency lighting cast strange shadows through corridors that were suddenly filled with smoke and confusion. Dong-hyun activated the prisoner release protocols using access codes that Bo-Ram had stolen from the security database. Thousands of cell doors opened, simultaneously releasing inmates who had been locked away for years. Some were dangerous criminals, but many were rebels and political prisoners who had been fighting against the Vorthon Empire. The prison that had never been breached in 10,000 years suddenly descended into complete chaos. Guards ran through corridors trying to understand what was happening, while prisoners poured out of their cells looking for weapons and ways to escape. The fortress security systems had been designed to handle individual escape attempts, not a mass breakout involving thousands of people. Wu Jin carried the semi-conscious Ye Jin through medical corridors that were now filled with emergency personnel trying to treat injured guards and prisoners. He had given her medication that would keep her stable during the evacuation, while making her appear unconscious to anyone who saw them. Jae-woo moved through the command center like a force of nature. He had trained for close combat situations, and the surprised technicians were no match for someone who had spent years fighting in impossible battles. Within minutes, he had disabled the remaining security systems and opened evacuation routes throughout the fortress. The 5 humans converged on their planned meeting point as the prison continued to tear itself apart around them. Explosions echoed through the corridors as more prisoners found weapons and began fighting with guards. Emergency alarms shrieked warnings that no one could understand because the communication systems were broadcasting in 17 different languages simultaneously. But their mission was far from over. They had successfully infiltrated the most secure prison in the galaxy and rescued their target. But they were still trapped on a planet surrounded by enemy warships with no way to escape. The hardest part of their impossible mission was just beginning. As they reached the rendezvous point where their extraction ship was supposed to meet them, they found only empty space and a message that made everyone's heart sink. The rescue vessel had been detected and destroyed by the fortress defense systems before it could reach the docking bay. They were stranded on a prison planet that was destroying itself with no way to get home. Jae-woo looked around at his team and saw the expression he had witnessed many times during his military career. The moment when soldiers realized that their mission had become genuinely impossible and that they were all going to die. But instead of giving up, he did what Navy SEALs were trained to do when facing certain death. He smiled and asked if anyone knew how to steal a Vorthon warship. The prison riot that Jae-woo had planned as a distraction was growing into something much bigger than anyone had expected. Thousands of prisoners who had been locked away for decades were now free, and they had no intention of wasting this opportunity. Aliens from dozens of different species poured through corridors that had never seen such chaos. The riot was spreading faster than the guards could contain it. Prisoners who had been enemies on the outside were now working together against their common jailers. They had found weapons storage areas and were arming themselves with equipment that was supposed to be impossible for inmates to access. Boram watched her computer virus spread through the fortress systems like wildfire. Every time, the Vorthon technicians fixed one problem, 3 more appeared. Door locks opened randomly. Artificial gravity fluctuated in different sections, and the communication systems had become completely unreliable. Her hacking programs were designed to learn and adapt as they encountered new security measures. The fortress computers kept trying to isolate the infected systems, but the virus was already embedded too deeply into the network to be removed easily. Hyojin's explosions had caused more structural damage than even she had calculated. The chain reaction of failures was spreading throughout the prison as support beams weakened and power conduits overloaded. Emergency systems that had never been tested in a real crisis were failing one after another. Entire sections of the fortress were losing life support as backup generators struggled to handle the increased load. Repair crews were too busy dealing with the riot to fix the cascading technical problems that were threatening to bring down the whole complex. The fortress that had been perfectly secure for 10,000 years was now coming apart like a machine with too many broken pieces. The Vorthon Empire had built their prison to be impregnable from outside attack, but they had never considered what would happen if the chaos came from within. Dong Hyun was leading the human team through maintenance tunnels and service corridors that most guards had never bothered to learn. His criminal background had taught him to always have multiple escape routes planned, and he guided them toward a section of the fortress that housed the administrative offices. But when they reached the extraction point where their rescue ship was supposed to meet them, they found nothing but empty docking bays and a recorded message from the fleet commander. The extraction vessel had been detected by fortress sensors while still millions of miles away, and had been destroyed by automated defense systems. The humans were trapped on a prison planet that was tearing itself apart with no way to escape and enemy reinforcements arriving every hour. The mission that had seemed impossible from the beginning had just become genuinely hopeless. Wu Jin checked Yejin's condition and found that she was stable but still weak from her imprisonment and the medication he had given her. She was conscious enough to understand their situation, but too sick to be much help in whatever desperate plan they might attempt. Next, the fortress. Alarms were screaming warnings about multiple system failures, while explosions echoed through corridors filled with smoke, and the sounds of fighting guards were trying to restore order. But the riot had spread to areas they could not easily reach. Jae-woo looked around at his team and recognized the moment he had seen in many combat situations when soldiers realized they were facing certain death. Instead of despair, he felt the familiar calm that came when all options had been exhausted except the most desperate ones. That was when Dong Hyun mentioned something that changed everything. He had been talking to some of the escaped prisoners and learned that several of them were former Starship pilots who had been imprisoned for piracy rebellion and other crimes against the Vorthon Empire. Among the escaped inmates was Captain Nex Ara, a former military officer who had been court-martialed for refusing to bomb civilian targets. She knew the layout of Vorthon warships better than anyone, and had been waiting 20 years for a chance to get revenge against the empire that had destroyed her career. There was also Engineer Torkul, who had been imprisoned for sabotaging weapons factories that produced equipment used to oppress conquered worlds. He understood Vorthon technology well enough to operate their ships and had memorized the access codes for military vessels. The most valuable ally was pilot Vex Tam, who had been captured while flying supplies to rebel groups fighting against imperial occupation. He had stolen Vorthon ships before and knew their weaknesses better than most people in the galaxy. These prisoners and dozens of others were not just random criminals. They were enemies of the Vorthon Empire who had been fighting a guerrilla war before being captured. They had skills, knowledge, and most importantly, motivation to cause as much damage as possible to their former captors. Dong Hyun explained that there was a Vorthon attack cruiser docked at the fortress for routine maintenance when the riot began. Most of its crew had been deployed to help contain the breakout, leaving only a skeleton security detail aboard the ship. The warship was one of the fastest vessels in the Imperial fleet, designed for hit and run attacks against rebel strongholds. It was heavily armed and shielded with engines powerful enough to outrun most other ships in space. Jae-woo realized that stealing the cruiser would solve two problems at once. They would have a way to escape from the prison planet, and they would deal a significant blow to the Vorthon military by depriving them of an expensive warship. But reaching the docking bay where the cruiser was moored would require fighting through corridors full of guards who were trying to restore order. The ship itself would be defended by security systems and crew members who would fight to the death rather than let prisoners escape. The plan that formed in Jae-woo's mind was even more desperate than their original mission. They would have to fight their way across a fortress that was falling apart while being hunted by thousands of guards, then capture a warship that they barely knew how to operate. Bo-ram said she could hack into the ship's computer systems once they got aboard, but warned that Vorthon military encryption was much more sophisticated than the prison security network. Hee-jin counted her remaining explosives and announced that she had enough left to either clear a path to the docking bay or disable the ship's defenses. Woo-jin prepared emergency medical supplies and stimulants that would keep Ye-jin conscious and mobile during the escape attempt. He also gathered equipment to treat the injuries that the team would probably suffer during the fighting. The group of escaped prisoners that had joined them was growing as word spread that someone had a plan to steal a Vorthon warship. Former rebels, smugglers, and pirates were eager to strike back against the empire that had imprisoned them. Captain Nexara took charge of organizing the prisoner assault force, while Engineer Torkul explained the technical challenges they would face in capturing and operating the cruiser pilot. Vextam studied the ship's specifications and warned that they would need to move fast once they reached the vessel. The Vorthon guards were beginning to organize a counterattack against the riot using heavy weapons and armored vehicles. They had realized that this was not a random prison break, but a coordinated assault that threatened the security of the entire fortress. Time was running out as reinforcements arrived from other Imperial facilities. The longer they waited, the more defenders would be deployed to protect the cruiser. But rushing the attack without proper preparation would result in failure and death for everyone involved. Jae-woo made the decision that would determine whether they lived or died. He gave the signal to begin the final phase of their impossible mission, the assault on the Vorthon warship that would either carry them to freedom or become their tomb. The battle for the docking bay began with Hyejin's explosives clearing a path through corridors filled with armed guards. The escaped prisoners fought with desperate fury, knowing that capture meant execution, while the human team moved through the chaos like a precision instrument. Bo-ram used her remaining hacking tools to disable security doors and surveillance systems, while Dong-hyun led them through passages that avoided the heaviest fighting. Woo-jin carried Ye-jin on his back, protecting her from the violence that surrounded them. The fortress shook with explosions and the sounds of battle as hundreds of prisoners fought against Imperial guards in corridors that had never been designed for warfare. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows while smoke and flames made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. When they finally reached the docking bay, they found the Vorthon cruiser, waiting like a sleeping metal giant surrounded by a small army of guards who had been ordered to defend the ship with their lives. The final battle was about to begin. The Vorthon attack cruiser sat in the docking bay like a giant metal predator, its dark hull gleaming under the emergency lights that cast red shadows across the walls. The ship was 200 meters long with weapons that could destroy smaller vessels and engines powerful enough to outrun anything else in space. Around the cruiser were 30 Vorthon guards in full combat armor, carrying weapons that could punch holes through steel walls. They had orders to protect the ship at all costs, and were prepared to die fighting, rather than let prisoners escape with Imperial military property. Captain Nexara studied the defensive positions and counted the enemy forces. She had fought battles like this before during her years as a rebel commander and knew that a direct assault would result in heavy casualties, but they had advantages that the guards did not expect. The escaped prisoners were not just random criminals. They were veterans of a dozen different wars who had been fighting against the Vorthon Empire long before being captured. They knew Imperial tactics and had personal reasons for wanting to cause maximum damage to their enemies. Engineer Torkul explained the technical challenges they would face once they captured the ship. The cruiser's computer systems were protected by military encryption that would take hours to crack without the proper access codes. But he had worked on similar vessels and knew where to find emergency override controls. Pilot Vextam warned that even if they managed to take the ship, they would still have to fight their way past the orbital defense platforms that surrounded Kronex 7. The fortress was protected by automated weapons that could track and destroy fast-moving targets, but Jae-woo had an idea that was so crazy it might actually work. Instead of trying to sneak past the defenses or fight them directly, they would use the chaos inside the fortress to create a distraction that would confuse the orbital weapons systems. BORAM would hack into the fortress communications network and broadcast false emergency signals that would make the defense platforms think they were under attack from multiple directions. Hyejin would detonate her remaining explosives to create the Yai appearance of a massive assault on the prison. The battle for the cruiser began when Captain Nexara led 50 escaped prisoners in a frontal assault against the guard positions. The Vorthan soldiers were skilled and well-equipped, but they were outnumbered and fighting enemies who had nothing left to lose. Jae-woo and his team used the distraction to approach the ship from an unexpected direction. They climbed through maintenance shafts and emerged inside the cruiser's docking tube where only a few guards were stationed. The fighting inside the ship was fierce and desperate as human and alien rebels battled Imperial soldiers in corridors designed for routine operations, not combat. The Vorthan crew fought bravely, but they were not prepared for enemies who seemed to appear from nowhere. Dong-hyun used his knowledge of ship layouts to guide the assault team toward the bridge, while avoiding the heaviest resistance. Engineer Torkul fought his way to the engine room where he began the startup sequence for the cruiser's powerful drives. BORAM reached the computer center and began the most important hack of her career. She had to convince the ship's artificial intelligence that she was authorized to operate the vessel, while simultaneously breaking through security systems that were designed to prevent exactly what she was trying to do. The Vorthan military computers were more sophisticated than anything she had encountered before, but they followed logical patterns that could be exploited by someone who understood how their programmers thought. She worked frantically as the battle raged around her, knowing that failure meant death for everyone. Woojin found a secure compartment where he could treat Yejin's injuries and prepare her for the stress of spaceflight. The young woman was weak but determined to survive after coming so close to freedom. She helped by monitoring the ship's medical systems and reporting on the condition of wounded rebels. Hyejin rigged the docking clamps with her last explosives, while the former prisoners secured the cruiser's weapons and defensive systems. When everything was ready, she detonated the charges and blasted the ship free from its moorings, causing massive structural damage to that section of the fortress. The cruiser lurched away from the docking bay as its engines came online, filling the surrounding space with brilliant blue flame. The fortress defense systems tried to target the escaping vessel, but were confused by the false signals that BORAM was broadcasting from multiple locations. Jae-woo took command of the bridge and immediately faced the greatest challenge of the entire mission. The prison planet was surrounded by an entire battle fleet of Vorthan warships, each one more powerful than the stolen cruiser. The enemy commanders were ordering them to surrender or be destroyed, but instead of trying to fight or run, Jae-woo did something that no military computer had calculated as a possibility. He ordered BORAM to open a communication channel to every ship in the system and broadcast a message that would change everything. The transmission that went out across space was Yejin herself, sitting up in the medical bay and speaking directly to the camera. She was alive and unharmed despite weeks of imprisonment and torture by the Vorthan Empire in violation of 17 different galactic treaties. She had detailed evidence of war crimes and corruption that BORAM had discovered in the fortress computer systems during their escape. The prison was not just holding legitimate criminals, but thousands of political prisoners who had been illegally detained without trial. The broadcast included medical records showing systematic abuse of inmates, financial documents proving that prison officials were stealing supplies meant for prisoners, and communication logs revealing plans to execute political enemies without legal justification. Within minutes, the transmission was being rebroadcast by news services across the galaxy. Alien governments that had treaties with the Vorthan Empire began demanding explanations, while human colonies that had lost citizens to imperial justice started organizing protests. The political scandal that erupted made it impossible for the Vorthan fleet to attack the escaping humans without causing a diplomatic crisis that would affect trade relationships and military alliances across multiple star systems. Several Allied governments immediately demanded investigations. The enemy warships found themselves in an impossible position. They could not destroy the stolen cruiser without also killing the witness whose testimony was already spreading across galactic communication networks. But they could not let the rebels escape without admitting that their most secure prison had been defeated by a handful of humans. Jae-woo used this confusion to negotiate safe passage to a neutral space station where Ye-jin could receive proper medical treatment and where the rescued prisoners could seek asylum from governments that opposed the Vorthon Empire. The stolen cruiser limped through space with damaged engines and hull breaches that Woo Jin and the other survivors worked frantically to repair. They had achieved something that every computer in the galaxy had calculated as impossible, but they were not safe yet. 3 hours later, the ship docked at Omega Station, a neutral facility that served as a meeting place for diplomats, traders, and refugees from across the galaxy. Dr. So-min Park was waiting at the airlock with tears streaming down her face as she was reunited with her daughter. The mission that had started with a 2% chance of success was complete. All 5 human team members had survived along with dozens of escaped prisoners who had helped them capture the Vorthon warship. The fortress that had never been breached in 10,000 years was now a symbol of imperial weakness. When reporters asked Jae-woo how he had known the plan would work, he gave them the same answer he had been giving throughout his military career. Humans did not calculate probability the same way as other species in the galaxy. They did not ask whether something was possible or impossible. They asked whether it was worth doing, and then they found a way to do it. The Vorthon Empire had given him a 2% chance of success, and he had wondered what he was supposed to do with the other 98%. The answer turned out to be simple. He used that 98% to prove that impossible was just another word for difficult, and that humans who refused to accept defeat could accomplish things that no computer could calculate. The galaxy would remember this lesson for a very long time.